Cool.
All right, cool. So it's Michael and Daniel talking about navigation things. So Daniel, kick it off.
Yeah, so I had started this by doing some work looking at the settings in the admin page because we want to try and bring parity between the environments between the .com and the self-managed instance. And so through that, there's a lot of settings that don't necessarily overlap. Hey, Nick. And so I was saying the settings in the admin page has a lot of things that don't necessarily make sense or have context within the .com environment. And so bringing those over obviously won't make any sense. So when we do that, the idea would just be to get rid of those things. And so one of the things that I was concerned about was how that would impact other groups, other stages. And I know through doing a lot of this work that you've actually done a ton of work in regards to the settings. And also Nick has done quite a bit of research and thinking about navigation. So I wanted to kind of try and get a chat with everybody to get some input or feedback. And something that you had made this morning, or at least for me when I read it, I'll share the screen real quick. I think this screen here. So you had shown this visual. Oops. It's going wild here. This visual here about this new idea of this navigational system. So I was curious if you wanted to talk more about that and see, I guess, does it get rid of this left nav, or how do you envision that going forward?
Yeah. So this is the consolidation of the top nav. This is something that the editor group has been looking at for maybe the last month and a bit. Kind of inspired about by Nick's earlier work back in his like explorations of different navigations. We saw this one and thought it was a good opportunity to consolidate kind of all the high level items. And currently, they all live in they live under projects, groups, and then this mysterious bag of more. So what we're really trying to solve here is reducing the guessing of where things live. So these are high level objects. So the left nav will still remain as is. Well, the left nav will still remain per object area, but what we're planning to do is kind of consolidate the top three drop downs that we currently have into one big drop down.
Okay, so this is more just the top nav that we have currently, but adding these features. So you would remove these features from the left nav?
They don't exist on the left nav at the moment. These items here, all currently live under the more drop down. If you go on your top nav in GitLab, they'll be there underneath there, and then there'll be like the admin wrench button that appears if you're like an admin person currently in the top nav.
Okay.
So I
So
think
just to clarify, Dan, so when you see milestones and when you see things like snippets and all that sort of stuff, those live at the project level and the group level, but they also have they also live at the instance level or the workspace level generally, and the top nav bar basically switches between these containers like projects and groups, and then the items that don't necessarily sit within a particular container like a project or a group.
Okay, so that makes sense then. My confusion was, for example, like security, I thought existed somewhere in the left nav at some point. Yeah, security and compliance. So I thought there might have been overlap, but I don't know if those two features are identical.
So yeah, security and compliance, they have features at the instance level, they have features at the group level, and they have features at the project level. And the ones that you see currently in the top nav, which you can access from the top nav today, are the instance level features. So this is sort of like one of the weird quirks of GitLab's navigation is these different buckets. And I realize that I've just butted in. Mike's in charge of this. Sorry, Mike. You go ahead.
No worries. You explained it really well, Nick. So cool, all good.
Yeah, so this is what I was looking at, I guess, by clicking on this security, it drops into this thing that exists in nowhere. Is that correct? It just exists in this thing called security.
Technically, yeah, this is like, this exists at the workspace or instance level.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting, because this idea of something existing at the instance level is kind of the start of what we were looking at, by bringing parity or unifying, firstly, the project and group, and then also bringing parity between .com and self-managed with these features or settings. So we're gonna, or the idea, the proposal being that we're gonna create a new object at the top level, which will be this namespace object, which then all these things that exist kind of on their own would then attach to. So like this idea of the security dashboard would attach to that top level. This idea of these global settings that I was thinking about would attach to the top level. These sorts of things that don't necessarily make sense being specifically at a group or a project or a subgroup. That kind of idea that it then moves to this new area of GitLab that we haven't fully envisioned or actualized yet. So that's sort of where, again, like I go back over here. So thinking about these things, well, looking at the admin screen, these were the initial features or settings that were in the admin screen. But then I didn't really think about this security object. So I wanted to go back and look at that. But you're saying if we want to use this new drop-down idea kind of to help with that, and this would attach to this top level, you're saying?
Yep. I think where you're going with this right now, yeah, I would say that this could be a top level thing, whether it's more important in projects and groups, or like, you know, and I think that's a future discussion that we can have. But yeah, I think where you're looking at, where it's just like controlling global settings for like instance, and like forward looking, it's like kind of scope to a namespace, to use your words there. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, and yeah, that was what I was trying to determine or find a solution for, is where should that object live? And this is my like first idea of like, okay, well, it's not going to exist in the subgroup, but if you go at the top level, it would just say this new navigational item. But I think this feels nicer. I would probably suggest this instead, because that way you're not necessarily changing the interface of whatever object you're in. So if you're in a group or a project, that kind of stays. So at least the information architecture that you're familiar with stays normal, and you're not adding anything complexity to that. Whereas I don't know if you've done research into how many people are using this, but I feel just from the outset, I'd never use it apart from like going to my group or my project. So I'm thinking that makes perfect sense to add it there.
Yeah, there's we're tracking the clicks on that, but we haven't created a dashboard to report on the clicks. So the instrumentation is there, but not the reporting.
Just going back to the kind of agenda you noted here. I think we discussed that. Make the title the landing page of the menu item. So that was something that I was thinking about when I did my research for the where I wanted to add members. One of the feedback that we had gotten was the people were thinking they could click on the top level container or the top level object. Let me share my screen real quick. So the idea that they would click here and it was separate from this. So I was curious to say, well, this is the same object. Would you get rid of this and just leave it here?
One thing that's useful, like a mental model that's useful for thinking about how our navigation works, is container and then container items. So workspace, group, and project could be a container. And then workspace, project, and group each have unique container items that are interchangeable, sometimes the same, whatever it is. So I'm just giving that mental model because I foresee this is probably a useful thing for aiding the discussion. And then Mike, I'll let you.
Yeah, that's something that I needed to say a few times when I was looking at this. Is like, yeah, where does everything live? And I think that's kind of like a future problem. And I think this is something that I keep on talking to my group about is, what problem are we solving? Are we solving the current problem, or is like, grouping things like this idea of namespaces could like change the way we do navigation in its own way. This issue that you're looking at right now is something that I just created right now, where looking at that high level thing, that whole GitLab project area, potentially you can get to that details page by clicking any of those 3 links at the top. So this is just a proposal to like potentially have one. But if we go down the road of using that logo area, like the company logo, yeah, that one there. If we use that to be something else, yeah, that's probably something that we can talk about, and maybe not today, but yeah, we can decide whether that's something you want to pursue, Daniel, because there's insofar in our like research, there's also been like this idea of like in issues, if I'm looking at issues for one project and I want to switch to another project, how might I do that? And a lot of people have suggested having a drop down within like the breadcrumb. So for example, you can switch things within the breadcrumb. I think there's more elegant ways to do that. Firebase does a pretty good execution of this idea of switching project spaces, but I think your head is also in this kind of namespace group, kind of like jumping these worlds. Introducing this other new world is interesting to me. Where am I going with this? Yeah, that top area is like malleable right now. So one execution is to potentially absorb project overview into that top area. The other alternative is like maybe you could take it to do your namespace thing, because I personally don't think we need 3 links to get you to the same page. I'm not against having multiple paths to a single page, because that's useful. That's like the nature of the web. But like within the same proximity of like they're all next to each other, we don't need that. So we could repurpose one of those links. And yeah, the top thing is an interesting one, but I would caution of taking that to like launch into another high level space, because people currently are accustomed to clicking that top part to go home, or like the homepage of their project. So hijacking that to take them to like a higher level instance might be tricky, but we can probably circumvent that by rethinking the project overview page, which is another thing that's also up for grabs for changing.
Yeah, that's so this idea of this namespace container, it's so it exists currently at the self-managed environment. But for example, like when we go here, this logically is this container, right? So it's the top level which exists. However, if we think about it from like a person who subscribes to GitLab, so they'll have this project, and this would be their top level, and that the object or the idea would be the associations or the attachments of the admin screen, the overview, or the security dashboard would exist at that very top, which would just be here, because this screen that we're looking at is kind of like GitLab's own space, right? Despite all these things are public, or that we have access to them because obviously we're the employees here. So it's kind of it's not necessarily like a new object. It's just a way to define or assign a logic to this level that we have as just a subgroup to the primary GitLab organizational structure. And it kind of puts a barrier between that so we can attach these features that we want to do. So like attaching the admin features. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it would change too much from this, at least not so much architecturally. It just kind of puts a more definitive space or definitive context around what this thing is. But I do agree, just looking at this, why does there need to be 3 clicks to do the same thing in this sort of object? And I do understand the value of being able to just click here and going to the top level of what your group would be. That was my only like concern about that, is that this top level is going to contain that global settings that I had proposed earlier, where it would then exist every sub project or every sub object underneath. I think that kind of, where did the screen go? No, I lost it. This one. I was looking at the proposal here. And so this idea of that it just takes you here and this is the details page of the overview page, that makes perfect sense. So I wouldn't want to change anything there because I don't think that really breaks anything. It doesn't really take away.
So I'm just gonna hijack some of these ideas. So I think this idea of namespaces introduces another thing. One thing that I was like kind of particular in some of my explorations was not using the left nav for high level items yet. But this might be an area for high level items. So I'm just gonna share my screen and just show you what Slack looks like for me. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, so Slack has this kind of idea of like, to me, these are essentially namespaces, right? Like, or like these high, and then you can have special rules for each of these individual groups, whatever they may be. But it kind of like potentially, I don't know if that's a real use case for your world, but maybe that's something that you could try, like, because these are different worlds.
This is something we're actually looking at because we have like the idea of a profile switcher that we're looking at that would allow people to switch between an admin persona or just an owner or a developer persona so that they can actually do their work without having to mess with any sort of the admin changes. But that was something that has been researched previous to me working here, was the idea of a spaces object or logic. And I think this namespace idea will basically take the place of that without creating a new, I guess, interface, so to speak. I think the way that Slack visualizes it, if we could translate that to the way GitLab works, is just those are just different groups, and it would just be a group switcher, less so like a persona or an organizational switch. But perhaps that's the sort of direction we need to think about it, because maybe it needs to be somebody who has a GitLab personal account, but then they switch to their business work that they're doing in their business environment. And obviously there needs to be separation between those so that there's no security concerns. I'm not sure how much of a disconnect there needs to be in the interface for that. I think just the way the Slack did it, just a simple like toggle or click would be sufficient. And I think functionally GitLab has that, at least if you're looking at the group viewer. As I saw earlier, we show all the group objects, but it's just a table of drop down folders, right? Obviously that can be a little bit visually presented better, but functionally, I don't know if there's much change needed.
So just to be clear, Dan, when you're saying you'd have different profile views, those profile views would be like an admin, my own personal account, and those would exist within the same namespace or instance, to use that interchangeably? Or would they exist across multiple workspaces or namespaces? So for example, in Slack, when you have those things on the far left, you have those are typically correlated with different email addresses, different organizations. So are you referring to switching between the user profile within the same namespace, or switching across namespaces from GitLab to Salesforce, let's say?
Right. So that's two things there. And I think we're trying to look at both of those. So one of them was the admin authentication. So I'm a user in an organization, but I also am the admin. But I don't want to have admin access all over the place in case something bad happens. So I'm still within the same organization or group container. And I simply toggle the admin switch account to allow me to do an admin job as I need. The iteration or the idea that Slack has is that it, again, like I said, it's totally a different connected email address or a different organization that prepends to the .com or .slack.com address. So it's like, in our case, gitlab.slack.com. That is the idea that we would have the namespace switcher where you would then switch between entire different organizations. So switch from my personal GitLab account where I'm doing my personal projects versus my business where I'm employed at, where I have my company email.com address versus my personal email.com address. And I think that's the two different switches.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Mm-hmm.
And how common is that use case of switching, of having multiple GitLab namespaces or instances and switching between those regularly?
Well, that's what, there's a few ways to look at that. So one of them was a security concern with some organizations that had contractors or freelancers who are using personal emails to work in an organization. And there was a need to switch to lock them out and give them a corporate email saying, you need to use your company email, but you're going to lose access to everything you've done so far, or we're going to absorb that as our intellectual property. So we wanted to have that separation. So I don't know the numbers, but I do know it's something that's quite important for us to work on. And that's kind of the point of where we're here with this, trying to solve this problem of putting a real divide and a real separation between these two processes.
Cool, good to know.
All right.
So we're almost out of time. I appreciate everyone's feedback. If you had anything else, please let me know.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share my screen again because that's what I do. So my parting note is that, like, I think you're working at a higher level than where my head is at. My head is like at like thinking of like, this is like not real, as in like it's still exploration, but it's like this idea of like, how do I get switching projects and groups easily within one instance of the world? You are thinking like at a higher level where I want to switch between multiple instances in different worlds. So I think we should continue sharing each other's like explorations and things, because like what I've seen over the last week is like some stuff might influence the way you're thinking and vice versa. So yeah, let's go ahead and just make an action to keep on sharing each other's work, because yeah, I think you're thinking more like outside, like potentially this changes, or like, you know, this changes like how Gmail does their kind of like world switching. But yeah, I'm
Yeah,
looking
that was
forward to.
my focus because, go ahead, Nick.
I'd say my recommendation here is, this is super abstract stuff, so it's clearly very hard to convey and communicate. So there's two things that I think you can do in order to improve the way that you communicate this problem, in order to get people to sort of rally around it more effectively. Number one is draw out the spaces. So just try and do some sketches and talk about, this is a namespace, this is where a group lives within the draw that out, draw out the information architecture. It's rudimentary. You may not get it perfect 100% of the time, but draw out that system of the way that you expect the user to interact, and that should help. And then number 2 is create some scenarios. So create a little storyboard or something saying, I want to switch between profiles because of XYZ, or I want to do this. And creating and making those stories, those storyboards tangible, again, will make it much easier to communicate what this problem is. And will also sort of open up the problem to allow people to provide feedback on how important things are to them. And this should help you to prioritize namespace, user switching, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I appreciate that feedback. And that was just to go back to what you were saying, Michael, was that definitely I'm trying to bring as many people into this and explain what's going on, because it will impact everyone, and because it is kind of a higher level. I don't want to basically go down a path without really getting much feedback from anyone else. So definitely, I think this would be more of a collaborative effort going forward.
Great.
Well,
If you
cool.
need
Thanks so
some
much, everybody.
feedback on, if you need some feedback on the abstract sketches, on the storyboards, anything like that, feel free to ping me. Yeah, because my head works in that abstract way, so I can probably help out with the system if you need.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. See you in a bit. Have a good day.
See ya.
Ciao, ciao.